Welcome. My name is Dennis Cerati. This is the Mazzini Society Report. Uh, this We have a special guest this morning. His name is Dr. Jack Dempsey. Jack has been with us before. Jack is a renowned scholar and an author, and he's presently living in Crete. And we're going to be discussing a very special subject today, a book that was recently written by Muhammad Ismail. And we're going to talk a little bit about his life in Gaza right now, and also we're going to be talking about his book. I think it's a very special occasion. We're right around Christmas time, and my understanding, and Jack can clear us up a little bit about it, is that they're hoping to get out of Gaza fairly soon. And I suppose that would be in the direction of Egypt. So here we are on the cusp of Christmas Eve as we're recording this, and thinking not just about them, but also about another family who were also forced out of that location, and which happened 2,000 years ago. So I think it's an appropriate occasion upon which to talk about their life in Gaza and the situation that they're facing. But more, and just as importantly, the book that Muhammad has written, I think it really stands to be looked at and understood by many people today, because he seems to have come up with a middle way in which both Israelis and Palestinians might see a path to the future. And I think it's an important book to be considered. And we're fortunate to have Dr. Dempsey here to discuss that book. And so, at any rate, I'm not going to go too much further. I think right away we're going to jump into the story that Jack has to tell on behalf of his friend, uh, Muhammad Ismail, and his family. And he already has something up in front of us. So go ahead, Jack. Why don't you just go plunge in and tell us a little bit of the story that you have to tell?
Okay, well, Muhammad's work is called Tomorrow Will Answer. And thank you for having me, by the way, Dennis. This is a real honor, as always. And I know Muhammad appreciates it as well. This is the cover of his book, Tomorrow Will Answer, Horror and Hope in Palestine by Muhammad Jihad Ismail. Um, that's his son, Jojo, or Jihad, looking out the broken window of their house on the community called Deir al-Balah, which is south of Gaza City. And he took that photo, and we thought it would be exactly right for the idea that the children are going to answer one way or another for what happens now. And so that gives a lot of urgency to Muhammad's work, not only for his own family, but for all the people of Gaza and the West Bank and Jerusalem, for that matter. They're being absolutely programmatically kicked out once and for all. They're going to be immiserated, confined in Gaza, made so miserable and desperate that they beg to be let go. And then Israel, they have said, will facilitate their travel to other countries. That's the plan, a complete ethnic cleansing and the death, literally the death of anybody who does not go along with that. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. So I hope that people will give a shot today to listen to Muhammad. He's just such a remarkable person. I've known him for about 5 years now. Uh, Everything he says comes out of his faith in God, his Islamic religion, and his incredibly deep patience. The Palestinian people have been at this for 76 and more years, being slowly and brutally displaced, but he never speaks of hatred. He never speaks of revenge. You know what he wants? His family comes from a Midland village called Shafir, where there was a temple, a mosque, and a church for generation after generation. They lived together more or less in peace and harmony and toleration. He wants to, if he couldn't physically go back there because it's now a destroyed area and a Jewish only settlement, but he would like everyone to live together on the land as civilized people. That's his basic vision. But as you mentioned in the intro, how we get there is a big problem that a lot of people are wrestling with. And I'm glad that you find Muhammad's point of view on that worthwhile. I could tell you how I first met him and run through a few of the basics about his background if you like.
I would love to hear that. And one of the things that I especially want to hear is how Muhammad's family is doing right now. And I know you've been following them right along. And not to get too graphic, but you know they're also a part of the story. So if you could tell us a little
Yes,
bit, yeah.
sure. Well, this is a photograph of Muhammad, his twin daughters, Dina and Lena, his lovely wife, Gada, and their son, Jojo. This is something of the neighborhood in which they live. This is a aerial shot of Gaza from a drone, and I don't think Berlin after the war looked this bad. Um, okay, to back up for a minute, I published in 2017 this book called People of the Sea, a novel of the Promised Land. And in the front matter, it has a couple of maps which show the ancient landscape of Canaan and Palestine. On the map, there's a coastal settlement called Bala, which had been very thoroughly excavated archaeologically. And I included it on the map because it's in a couple of scenes of the book. Muhammad wrote to me a year after that book came out, and he said, "That's where I live. I live in Bala. My town is in your book." I was so thrilled to read it. See, because we're parallel in this way. I've written the story of the ancient people and how the land Palestine came to have its name, how the Philistine Sea people mixed in with the Canaanites and so forth. And Muhammad is becoming the historian of modern Gaza. He's published a book called Fedai in the Sea and the Sea, which tells the story of how many Palestinians tried to leave Palestine by sea when they were ordered to do so in 1948. So between us, we cover the ancient and the modern story. And as we became closer friends, we began to produce discussion programs like this one. We've done over 50 of them now, from archaeology, history, literature, personal stories, just an endless variety of subjects about Palestine, his observations, the situation, their day-to-day life, and the way his thought has evolved over time. We've also started a blog about, I think over 2 years ago, at jackdempseywriter.wordpress.com, jackdempseywriter@wordpress.com. You can see lots and lots of pages of Muhammad and his family as they were working with our help to improve their home. And that's kind of when the war hit. So in the advance of the current so-called war, which is really a genocidal assault, right? His wife was pregnant with the two little twin girls that I showed you, and they were really hurting for food, fresh water, medicine, vitamins, any kind of staple of life without which our households would be in a tizzy, and they get them all at once, you know. So we started sending some money to pay for vitamins for his wife and to have regular checkups for the children in her womb. And thank God they were born healthily and they're doing great. Uh, but his wife told him, the doctor told her, that if it had not been for our intervention with a few $100s here, a few hundred there for support, they would have lost at least one of the babies because they were almost sort of borderline premature. So I'm saying this up front because I want people to understand that if they could, well, we have a GoFundMe now going for Muhammad and his family to try to get them out of there. We estimate that if we could get only, in internet terms, only 2,500 people to contribute $10 apiece, that would get them 25,000, which is their estimated total expenses. I mean, including airline tickets, a place to live in probably Cairo while they figure out what country to go to next. Uh, yes, bribes, because nothing happens over there without bribes to the right people to get you through the gate and so forth. But even $10 would be for them a bottle of aspirin or a bigger chance to get their children out of there, their young children who they want to have a life. They are dedicated, diehard Palestinians and they want to stay, but they don't know how long this war is going to go on. They don't want their children growing up to say, why didn't you get us out of here? Why didn't you find us opportunities? And so forth. So they're really caught between a rock and a hard place, knowing now democratically, having decided as a family what they want to do, but not knowing if they're going to be able to and when. So it's just a living hell. Any person in our world, Dennis, would be just bent in half by the stresses that they face constantly. So anybody that can reach out to that GoFundMe, we'll give them full information. They'll post it with the program. You wouldn't believe how much they would appreciate and benefit from that direct kind of help. That's the only way we can reach in now. They can't receive a book. My wife wants to knit them cardigans, little sweaters to keep warm in the winter. She can't send them. You can't send them anything. They've been complete prisoners for 16 years. But the man, just to go back to that part of the talk, the man, Muhammad, that I've come to know, he's so patient. He has such a beautiful smile when he manages to laugh about some absurdity of their situation. If I could share a couple of pictures, this is the house in Deir al-Balah where they lived. Now you'd say, oh, well, it looks okay, a 3-story house. Well, no, they were living in one room down here. And I have a picture of half of that room. That's what it was like. And there were 1, 2, 3, 5 of them plus their grandparents sharing this place with a little literal water closet for a bathroom. And then we started sending in some aid so that we got different kinds of technicians in there to put in better electricity, to paint and stucco the walls, to do the floors, to get some furniture. And they really had a nice place going. And here's the 2 little girls, Lena and Dina, watching TV in their new family room last year. You know, pretty comfortable. And you can see a big screen TV on the wall there. And then in October last year, the war started, and they tried with all their might to hang on to that home, to stay there no matter whatever the danger was. There were bullets, pieces of shrapnel coming through the walls. At times, they huddled in one room of the house they called their safe room to hopefully have not the whole building collapse on them. It was shuddering and shaking. The support pillars cracked. And then one night, Israel dropped white phosphorus. I think I got it.
Phosphorus.
Yeah, white phosphorus into the courtyard of their home. Yeah, maybe I've got it wrong here.
Oh.
And they said, okay, we've got to get out. I mean, that's a war crime anyway, but they said, we've got to go listen to the authorities now and get out. So they went like this in a great walking and half riding parade southward to Khan Yunis, about 10 miles south of Deir al-Balah. They stayed there about 6 weeks in just appallingly overcrowded, unsanitary, unsupplied, bombarded situations. And then they were told, because the Israeli military was moving down southward, saying community by community is now a Hamas stronghold, and we're going to be bombing and fighting there, so you have to leave. So they went to Rafah, and they lived in that awful, hellacious tent city there for about 6 weeks. This is a snake that they managed to kill when it came into their tent. Mosquitoes, flies, gnats, snakes, scorpions, centipedes, every kind of horror you could imagine, biting wild dogs. The tents cook you in the day and freeze you at night. So that's where they were, and became unbearable. And the final part of the general outline that I'd like to tell you is that when Rafah became unbearable, they decided as a family group, not with the people around them, but as about 13 people altogether, to walk back home. They walked back northward up the sea coast to their home in Balah, risking their lives every moment of a day-and-a-half trek with all the children, terrified, being harassed by drones. If they stopped too long to go to the bathroom or something, they could be targeted. They're seeing dead bodies everywhere. Every bomb building they go by smells of corpses. It's just the most, pardon the term, but the most biblical damn journey you could imagine. They made it back to their home, and now still these days they're being hit by journeys, visits through by tanks and infantry, rockets, missiles. They one night recently, his wife and their son Jojo were side by side with their heads on a pillow, and a piece of shrapnel, boom, just it was spent, came through the wall and landed right between their heads on the pillow. Big chunk of jagged steel. That's what shrapnel is. And it kills you. So meanwhile, Muhammad, his brother, very handsome man, Ahmad, and his brother-in-law, his wife's brother, also named Muhammad, were killed by random artillery shelling as they went out on their journeys each day, as each kind of man of the house has to do, to get water and maybe some food and things like that. But an even topper of an irony is that Hamas has been right along stealing every bit of aid that gets in. It's supposed to be, and it's marked not for sale. It's free to the people of Palestine when anything comes in from overseas. Hamas gunmen steal it and then sell it at exorbitant prices to people who have no money anyway. So, these things happen. We're an old man in a wheelchair already. He lost his legs in the Peace March of 2018. He started to complain to one of the Hamas vendors there, and they shot the guy to death right there in the wheelchair. These people are, Muhammad's book is incredibly fair-minded, sympathetic, believe it or not, to the Israeli side, and also understanding very well about the workings of Hamas. When he was a boy, the IDF used to come in to their neighborhood lots of times. He got sent out by his grandmother to get her heart medicine at the local pharmacy. A gang of Israeli soldiers grabbed him, about 9, 10 years old, and beat him to a pulp there in the street. Then Hamas takes over in 2007 with a pretty much virtual dictatorship. And Muhammad himself was imprisoned for writing a couple of journal articles that were critical of them. They see themselves as an elite, separate clan of families who have no connection with and no obligation to the Palestinian people of Gaza themselves. And as his analysis in his book will show, that operation was all about them. It had absolutely no vision for what was then going to happen to the Palestinian people in Gaza. They didn't care. And so they even now, when they say they're hiding among the civilians, they're using a given house or building as a jail where they imprison fellow Palestinians and beat them and torture them, sometimes murder them for speaking out against them. They're taking money from Iran and other places. They wouldn't last politically 6 months without outside funding, and that's been the case for years because they do nothing for the people. And Muhammad recognizes all this very clearly and very bravely. So that's part of what's in store for people, an analysis that fair-minded and that detailed, pointing to the way he sees, well, I don't see any other way for it to go forward except like this. And we'll get into that as you may wish. Thanks for letting me lay out some things, Dennis.
Thank you. That's a really good description of a nightmare. And it's just horrendous to think about. And I just have 2 points before we continue. The first point is I want to double down on your appeal for some donations. And I've been very aware of that as some other people who I know who have been able to, come up with some extra help to help the family. And I just want to double down on that, how important this is. A lifeline. They're very fortunate. They're very fortunate to have you and other people who have taken the opportunity, the opportunity to do something which really is beyond, anything to do with, official, actions. You're just taking the action as individuals who have a concern and a care and a love for these people who are suffering so much. And I think that's just something that we all have to recognize and, come up with a little bit of money. And it's not, like you say, you're not asking for a lot from a few. If we can get enough people to just, come up with a donation, this nightmare will end, at least for this family for now, and hopefully, going forward, just to be able to hear his voice and to read his words is so important right now for the world, and for the people of Israel and the people of Palestine, because
Yeah.
he really represents a middle way, a way that sees beyond the present troubles and sees a way forward that will bring benefits to everybody in that region. Um, not just the Palestinians, but also the Israelis. Many Israelis do want peace, despite what we see happening. So I think this is an opportunity, and I think everybody should recognize this is not just a lifeline, but it's an opportunity for you to have a voice, because I think Muhammad speaks for many of us when he talks about how we need to understanding, having insight into what actually is behind all of the violence and all of the distrust and everything that has gone on for generations. He's able to
Yes.
see that so clearly and to express it and to describe it. And it would be so helpful for people on both sides to be able to read his words, and because I think it'll have a calming influence. So you know just
That's exactly his presence. That's exactly who he is. Excuse me.
exactly. So the other thing I just wanted to mention, one other point, yeah, his wife is pregnant, and I don't know whether I caught you mentioned that, but I just
Yes.
also wanted to bring that up,
Yes.
because I think this is uh,
I'll,
important.
I'll, I'll tell, I'll tell,
Go
I'll
ahead.
tell you something about that that'll make you smile because it made him smile. They
Okay.
had been at Rafah in the hellhole of the tent city in Rafah, walked back, managed to survive, and the night that they came back to the house, he told me this was the first night that they were able to make love in a long time. And he says, I don't know how this happened. And I
Boy.
started to laugh. I said, well, what do you mean you don't know how this happened? He says, well, I used protection. And I said, well, Muhammad, I guess you're just a stud of a man or a lion of a man. And he laughed for a half an hour at that, but I mean, you try to think of his face. I'll see if I can reach this photo here. I mean, his face in this picture to me, it shows his humanity and gentleness and the great pain and anxiety in his
Yeah.
face. He loves his family more than anything in the world,
Yeah.
and he would give his life to protect and help them. And in a way, that's what he's putting on the line to try to
Yes.
do it. But not only for his family, as you just said, for everybody. He show you where you have a stake in
Right.
this.
Exactly. Well, that's good. So let's go on a little bit to his book, and I'm not sure how it's. I just finished reading it last week, as one of the most
Uh-huh.
amazing. It's a short book that people are going to be able to read, and immediately take something of value, and an incredible amount of insight that he has from the inside of the
Yeah.
health that we know. And I think being able to sort out and bring meaning to that is really such a gift. He has the insight and the knowledge of a great historian. Not all historians are able to put together all of the facts and come up with
And,
a.
and, he, and he's doing it under fire.
That's what's so amazing.
They're coming after his life every day of the week while he's doing this, keeping himself level-headed while
That
this is happening.
he's writing history. Okay, the genocides everywhere. I'm writing about it. So whoever has done that, not too many people. This is something that everybody should be reading. I hope that, and maybe you could tell a little bit more about what the plans are to get this book into people's hands, um, and be able to read
Okay.
it. So
Okay. Right now we have it in an Adobe Reader file
uh,
that he would like to offer for sale for $10, and anybody can purchase it. Uh, and we're working on publishers or working with publishers in Egypt, one in Lebanon, which may be problematic now, but also another one far off enough in Japan, who are very interested in having this. The book is constituted by his responses to 30 questions that were garnered from Arabic media appearances. He'd go on a radio show and talk about current events and all this. And a woman in Lebanon last year had compiled the text of all his answers. And he
Hmm.
sent them to me in his rough translation into English. And I polished them up as an English, professor and stuff. And together we put this book out. So it's only, I think, 35 pages long, something like that. But as you say, it's just packed with information and insight and vision that could help. And it's also, again, speaking to the Israeli side of things. He respects their doggedness. He respects their courage and their willingness to fight for what they believe. So he doesn't discount that at all. But he's got some very interesting things to say about what that tradition really means to us. A tradition of integrity, a tradition of self-interrogation, and a tradition that is willing to learn from mistakes. If you say mistakes, you're not talking about crimes. You're not talking about blame or guilt or punishment. He just wants people to realize what has gone wrong and what we can do for each other to right it again. It's an amazing piece of visionary work.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a great description. And I just wish more people would be reading it right now. And I think that you know that's going
And
to.
it's nice that for once being a historian is a kind of an advantage because he realizes that those other approaches, blame, conviction, uh, conflict, these other things have not worked. History is one long sequence of mistakes from
Yes,
which we learn. And he has that perspective to say, we can all be wrong. Now let's
yes,
all do something right and get out of hell together.
yeah.
Do you
That's
want to uh, do you want to try some passages from his book, a paragraph or two or
I
a
think
page?
that would be excellent if you could give us just a little bit to digest. Because as as I know from having read it, there are a lot of ideas around there in that book that don't get the kind of exposure that they need to have because I know on the liberal Israeli side, there's a lot of, it's what is it? I forget the name of the organization Israeli, but they've been fighting. A lot of Israelis and Jews outside of Israel have been fighting for a two-state solution, and this is not the solution that Muhammad, himself would choose, as I understand, what he's saying. He's looking for a way to bring everybody together in a harmonious whole, and that's going way beyond what most people, like in terms of emotional response, are able to fathom right now. And I've talked to a lot of Jews, a lot of Zionist Jews, and I think most of them would say right off the bat that's impossible. But yet, when you read Muhammad's ideas and his words growing out of his experience, you will come to believe that it is possible. And I think that's what's so important about this book. He will make you believe because of the place where he's coming from, just personally and also historically, able to put it into perspective. And so go ahead, read us a couple of the some verses, and then we'll.
Okay, the passage that I had in mind is about 2 minutes, but I'd like to say one other thing, important thing up front. Muhammad and I did a series of, I think, 2 or 3 programs comparing, as scholars, my, excuse me, my biblical tradition with his Quran tradition toward the existence of outsiders and when they have conflict. And what he pointed out or helped me learn very much is that in the Torah, there's no chance for coexistence. From the very beginning, it's a genocidal mandate to go in, take that land, and remove the people. On the Quran side, and this fits with his views too, he's not against necessarily armed resistance. But as the Quran dictates, as he explains it to me, you have to respect the stranger and the person who is not of your community unless and until they do you harm. Then you may use any means to defend yourself. Okay, so he's not shying away from that line if necessary. but he does see beyond it. So if it's okay with you, Dennis, I'll go right into it and then we can discuss.
Yeah, good.
Okay, the question comes to him. It says, in Gaza of 2018, during the Great March of Return, we saw Israel's answer to nonviolent Palestinian protest. Meanwhile, those who insist on, quote, a greater Israel are as dedicated as Palestinians are to what they believe are their rights. Is there any path to a peace that lets both sides live as who they are? He says, you asked me to climb the last hill and see into the land of milk and honey. I can only share what my observations, research, and best understanding suggest. Now, as a Palestinian with eyes and ears, I know that most of our people want peaceful coexistence achieved by nonviolence. This was the spirit of their Great March in 2018, and Hamas had no part in it, not until the second day began, when they and Jihad planted snipers among the crowds and, yes, killed not a few IDF soldiers. We must have honest accounts of what happened. When Israelis responded with snipers, then too came the slings and throwing stones, the hurling of iron construction bars, even balloons of fire that burned Israeli farmland. Hamas also used the march to reconnoiter the border for the plan of October 7th. They exploited and wrecked the march's first aim. And finally, when they forced their green flags into television clips of the mourners at 2018 funerals, this to our families was the height of illegitimacy, just like Hamas's righteous forbiddance or destruction of free Muslim Palestinian heritage. And that goes back, by the way, 9,000 years. He says, what is it to be Palestinian? It means that we are the living inheritors of all the traditions that have named and shaped this land. Curiously, Israel's own best digs reveal wave after wave of immigrants here, from the first Natufians to Canaanites, Edomites, Philistine sea peoples who named this land Palestine, and to Hebrews and Israelites. Palestine embraced the earliest Hebrews, sharing life from agriculture and trade to some religious practices. And that is archaeologically true, by the way. They were all, as the digs say, entangled in the normal human affairs of coexistence. The Torah, too, includes hybrid names born of family intermarriages. Yet under the new law of separation from the latecomer highland Israelites, who did not trade even with their own midland cousins, entanglements like marriage had to end. After all, it facilitated coexistence, and such is the law again in Israel today. This is the ignorant ground for Israel's paranoid hostility toward Iran as merely their peer and neighbor. Now, he says, that may surprise that I have no problem with a Zionism that means Jewish nationalism, as long as we have a state too. But I oppose all separation, racism, and expansionism. From there, we must notice that Greater Israel is rooted in a, quote, right of conquest. We once believed in the Torah's tales of Joshua's campaigns, then archaeology disproved them, and yet now, if you put the best datings of the destructions of Canaanite Philistine places in time order, you see that only about 200 years transformed them all into the first state of Israel. So we come to the crucial word, legitimacy. One cannot argue that the Israelite conquest of Palestine erased all indigenous rights. For how then did Israel's legitimacy survive their own conquerings in turn by Assyria, Babylon, Rome, and others? We begin to see the difference between demonstrable attachments to the land, which both sides can show to different degrees, and a grandiose neurotic protest that only certain people deserve exclusive possession and expansion. Yet the Torah and its child apartheid Israel now dream of taking Sinai as a land so key to their ancestors, Jordan as the land of their tribes Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, southern Lebanon as the inheritance of Asher and Naphtali, and southern Syria as lands of Manasseh too. As he closes, those who believe in exclusive rights and expansion against other human beings must intend their violent subjugation. Israel's most desired goal of legitimacy, however, cannot rest upon violence. For me, the secret of an honorable legitimacy hides in plain sight. Look at the two simple paragraphs of 1917's Balfour Declaration, which Israel venerates like Holy Writ. The first condones an Israeli state on the condition in the second paragraph, quote, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. So he says, it seems clear that their true legitimacy is a long way off. First, there must be a rigorous reckoning that dismantles apartheid and repairs so many hideous mistakes. Is this
Well,
impossible for Israelis? Is he closing now? Is this impossible for Israelis? I see their spiritual strength, and I do not think so. In closing, let me point to the counsel of Israel's distinguished journalist, Richard Ben Kramer. In Hebrew, he says there is a verb, lakshot, which means their tradition of fearless, relentless interrogation of facts toward genuine truth. Is there any more honorable application of learning? Such a self-interrogation, Kramer says, would make Israel more Jewish, not less. And that is no threat to Palestine, Muhammad says. If they can do it, so can we. As the poet said, the ego blames, but the soul forgives. All we see now is the mutually murderous futility of trying to build a real world on maleducation, falsehoods, and addictive hypocrisy. So he thanks us for these questions to the radio listeners he was speaking to. And he says, one sentence, every single person has a stake in the resolution of this conflict, because if you will not act to foster justice for everybody, you can only be sure that each day fewer people will act toward justice for you.
perfect. Thank you. Well, I want to thank you for an excellent and succinct explanation of what's going on in Gaza and what's going on in this particular family life. And I just want to ask people again, keep your mind open, keep your mind active, and read Muhammad's book.
Yes, and we hope that they'll either contact me or Muhammad directly, because we'll put his GoFundMe, my email, and Muhammad's email in the information with this video. They can also reach me at WordPress, Jack Dempsey Writer at WordPress.com.
Good.
And if the name of the GoFundMe at that site, GoFundMe, is Support Muhammad Ismail and His Children. So if you want to go, it's perfectly secure in terms of a simple use of a credit card. There's no problem with them getting the money directly, which they are saving up for their exodus, as it were. And Dennis, finally, I want to close by thanking you for having so much of a big heart and how much you've shared already and donated and given your time and your listening to this. I'm just going to hold it up again. They're an ordinary human family who want and deserve to live. And this brilliant man of peace, and he can help a lot of people if we give him a chance to do that. So he and I both thank you very sincerely.
And I thank you. And you've been holding that lifeline, and we're going to have a whole lot of other hands grabbing onto that thing, hopefully. So thank you again.